The War of 1812. January 1813. The war thus far. On January the 12th, or the 19th, depending on your source, William Jones, a successful Philadelphia businessman, former congressman, and Revolutionary War veteran, and member of the American Philosophical Society, becomes Secretary of the Navy, replacing Paul Hamilton. According to his entry on Wikipedia, quote, his policies contributed greatly to American success on the Great Lakes and to a strategy of coastal defense and commerce raiding on the high seas. In late 1814, near the end of his term, he made recommendations on the reorganization of the Navy Department. End of quote. My knowledge of the war is not sufficient to allow me to comment on that in any detail, but it's generally accepted that the U.S. Navy performed well during the conflict. Much better than the U.S. Army. From January 18th through to the 23rd occur a series of events that Pierre Berton describes as the tragedy of the Raisin. On January the 10th, an American force under Brigadier General James Winchester arrives at the Maumee Rapids near present-day Perrysburg, Ohio. As noted in my October 1812 video, Winchester was supposed to command the Army of the Northwest, but was pushed aside when William Henry Harrison was made a Major General of the Kentucky Militia, then a Major General in the regular U.S. Army. Winchester agrees to serve under Harrison and commands one wing of Harrison's forces. If Pierre Berton is correct in his observation, and I have no reason to doubt him, Winchester is extremely unpopular with the troops, especially with the Kentucky militia. According to Berton, Winchester considers resigning upon learning of his replacement by Harrison, but instead decides to serve on. I think his first idea was actually the best one. On January the 13th, two residents of nearby Frenchtown, present-day Monroe, Michigan, bring a message to Winchester's headquarters from Cecil Day, an American settler and trader living in the village. In the note, Day estimates that 500 Americans could take and hold the village. Over the next few days, several more messengers will arrive, claiming the British intend to burn the settlement, which they are defending with only 2 companies of Canadian militia and 200 native warriors. After a council of war, Winchester agrees to send 500 men under Lieutenant Colonel William Lewis, as he believes he will soon be reinforced by Harrison's troops. But, as Sandy Antal notes in his book, A Wampum Denied, Proctor's War of 1812, this plan is not without risk. While Frenchtown was only 35 miles from the Maumee Rapids, it was also only 18 miles from Fort Malden/Emmitsburg, inviting a British counterattack. The U.S. troops depart on January the 17th, advancing 18 miles to spend the night at Presque-Isle, present-day Toledo, Ohio, and the following day, determined to get to Frenchtown before the British can reinforce it, they marched over the lake ice to arrive at the settlement at around 3 in the afternoon. An American charge drives the 2nd Essex Regiment and their Potawatomi and Wyandot allies from the village. But the Canadians and the native warriors retreat in good order and inflict serious casualties. Antal reports 12 Americans killed and 55 wounded. Still, the Americans are elated with their victory, and Winchester hastens to the settlement with 250 regulars, plus a herd of cattle and 200 hogs. We shall be hearing more about these hogs shortly. But once ensconced in Frenchtown, Winchester fails to secure the village and erect defensive barriers, believing, erroneously, that it is too cold for the British to attack. Warren's Maxim of War, number 609. It is never too cold for an enemy to mount an attack. Meanwhile, at Fort Malden, British Colonel Henry Proctor has been busy. On learning of the seizure of Frenchtown, he began making plans to dislodge the Americans before Harrison can reinforce Winchester's forces. Channeling his best Isaac Brock, Proctor strips the fort's defenses and hurriedly assembles a force of around 1,200 men, including 336 regulars, 212 militiamen from the 1st and 2nd Essex regiments, and 500 native warriors under Roundhead, Splitlog, and Walk on the Water. Proctor's force arrives at Frenchtown at dawn and advance towards the village undetected. They are just about to charge the settlement when American drummers sound reveille, and they are spotted by an American sentry who fires on them, rousing the U.S. camp. The British assault is initially stymied with heavy casualties, but the native warriors manage to turn the right flank of the American line, forcing the U.S. troops to fall back, their retreat turning into a rout in which many were killed or captured. And among the captured was General Winchester, the general's 16-year-old son, and Lieutenant Colonel William Lewis. Winchester surrenders. Meanwhile, a group of Kentucky militiamen under Major George Madison, no relation to President James Madison, I think, hiding behind the picket fencing that sheltered the village, were holding their own and inflicting serious damage to the attacking British. But they were now down to 2 to 3 cartridges per man. Madison, who believes that Winchester's order to surrender is not binding on him, as the general is a prisoner, wants terms, causing Proctor to snap, "Do you mean to dictate to me?" To which Madison replies, "I mean to dictate for myself, and we prefer selling our lives as dearly as possible, rather than be murdered in cold blood." The militiamen are clearly worried they will be killed by the native warriors if they surrender. In view of what happened next, accounts as to the terms of surrender vary, but in any event, the Kentucky men lay down their arms at 11 a.m. Now, General Winchester had been captured by a native warrior named Brandy Jack, who turned him over to Roundhead, a Wyandot chief. Roundhead stripped Winchester of his hat, his coat, and his sword before daubing his skin with paint and presenting him to Proctor, who has trouble convincing the warrior to return the garments. It is but one more humiliation for Winchester, who, according to Pierre Berton, was the victim of numerous practical jokes at the hands of his wild Kentucky militiamen. Proctor fears an immediate attack by the Americans. He has heard a false rumor that Harrison and his men are only 8 miles away, and so he departed for Fort Malden on the afternoon of the 22nd, leaving behind 64 seriously wounded American prisoners, which sets the scene for tragedy. Proctor believes he has no choice. With over 500 American prisoners and his own wounded, he is in no condition to fight Harrison's fresh troops. In fact, he probably believed that Harrison would soon be in Frenchtown and would take charge of the American wounded. The wounded Americans were under the care of 2 surgeons plus some attendants, but the British on site appear to have been gone when 200 native warriors arrived on the morning of the 23rd. After robbing the wounded of their clothing and killing those unable to move, the warriors set fire to the 2 houses which had been serving as hospitals, and then marched those still alive into captivity, murdering those who could not keep up. In a macabre note, the hogs which Winchester ordered to Frenchtown were observed to be dining on some of the unburied dead. Gosh, that's enough to put you off your bacon. The massacre at Frenchtown became a national outrage in the U.S., which adopted the battle cry, "Remember the raisin! Remember the raisin!" Henry Proctor was blamed for the slaughter of the wounded, but the British believed the native atrocities were revenge for atrocities committed by the Kentucky militiamen. Personally, I think Proctor did believe that Harrison was on the march, and his arrival would save the American prisoners. The final butcher's bill? Wikipedia lists the following figures: British/Canadian/Native allies, 40 dead, 162 wounded, and 3 captured. American, 410 dead, 94 wounded, and 547 captured, 30 to 100 of those being killed in the ensuing massacre. Proctor's defeat of Winchester's forces was, according to Sandy Antal, quote, "one of the most complete of any in the war, having wiped out the fighting corps of the Northwest Army. He had effectively foiled Harrison's winter offensive." End of quote. Thus, 1813 dawns with a stalled American offensive, and, to quote the title of Sandy Antal's chapter on Frenchtown, "with blood and ice, the War of 1812 is about to get a whole lot nastier." If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also review a book about the war. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. When the barrage lifts, cheers. Warren here. Just a quick note. I wish to apologize for my slow uploading on this channel. I still haven't posted October's book review, and it's January. Yikes. I must admit that I find the research and writing for 1812 channel to be very challenging and time-consuming. But I'm committed to what a friend calls the 1812 project, and I intend to soldier on. I hope you will march in step with me. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pics Here, and they show winter scenes similar to those that the British, Canadian, and American soldiers would have seen during the Battle of Frenchtown. The last picture, though, actually shows some cannon at Fort George in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where I once worked as a security guard many, 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 many years ago. Oh, and the music? It's Oppressive Gloom by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. I thought it was appropriate for a story about cousins killing cousins. When the barrage lifts, till then, keep your head down.